Okay, so in case selection, I said this is like almost kind of more realistic, that just about every group of organisms have things that are going to limit their population density, like shortage of food, space, da 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 da, and bring that population to some kind of level called the carrying capacity, K. I probably didn't mention that term, which I should have. That's a big one. That looks like, what does this look like? This looks like a negative feedback kind of thing, right? Where the level of something is being kept kind of at a certain homeostatic, steady state kind of level. So all those words apply here as well, right? Whereas the R selected kind, they kind of shoot up and down a lot more with the seasons or time of year or whatever, you know, like in the desert when it rains, they'll shoot up, and then as it gets dry for another 20 years, population size will go down. So here you see some case selected ones, right? Even though this one had an initial flare up in population size, it gradually hovered around carrying capacity. And what caused this decline, a great deal of what caused this decline was this increase. All of a sudden, there's too many individuals for the amount of food that these little creatures, these little water fleas had to eat or whatever, right? So here's an R selected one, right? Which never kind of hits that carrying capacity thing because for whatever reason, it looks like about every 10 years, right? You see the pattern here? About every 10 years, their population size plummets. Now, why might that be, and justify your prediction or your proposal, right? And so a logical one here will be maybe they live in an area that basically in this period of time anyway, for about every 10 years had drought, which in fact would be the case with this particular example from a famous study somewhere, right? That they would be affected by drought, and that's why you see their numbers plummet. And then when the rains come back, they have enough water and food and stuff like that to increase their numbers again. So, why do all populations eventually stop growing? Well, that is again like dependent on your density, or maybe not dependent on your density. So you have this set of graphs here, which could come with explanations in terms of if you're the kind of thing that has a density dependent death rate, right? When your population increases a whole lot, since your death rate depends on the density, then you're going to have more death, right? As your population gets more dense. So if you slow down and think about what these labels mean, they really make obvious lots of sense, right? This blue one's the birth rate. If your birth rate depends on the density of individuals in your group and that density increases, right, you would expect the births to decrease because density is going to hurt your birth rate because there's less resources. Okay, enough of that. So here as some examples, these are classic kinds of graphs they could give you and ask you to produce what, but you look at this, you see the density of females in this group of birds. As the density increases, what do? They lay less eggs because that's what clutch size means, right? They lay less eggs. How can these birds know, first of all, what's the density of females in the area? Well, that's not hard to answer and to justify. Well, possibly it's because they can process in their little tiny brains the number of different bird songs they hear from females. Or, of course, they can see, so they can see females a little bit. There are different ways where a bird's brain can know what the density of females is in their immediate area, just relatively. But a much tougher question to answer is, okay, then how does that relate to the fact that if they sense a whole bunch of females around, they lay less eggs than if they sense less females around. Are they consciously laying these eggs? Well, you can do tests to figure out, no, that's not how it works. But something in their little brains is telling their egg-laying mechanisms to make more or less. That you can observe, and you can only then come to a conclusion here that this egg-laying feature, characteristic, trait is density dependent. Because you can see that increase and decrease in density does make a difference. That means it's density dependent. I'll skip that one because it's the same kind of idea. Okay, so here you have predator-prey interactions, which obviously are going to affect the size of population of both the prey here and the predator here. And this is a classic kind of graph that you would kind of expect about how long does it take a change in one of these to affect the other. Well, here's when, right here is when the number of rabbits started to decrease. If the number of rabbits start to decrease, now we're back to food web stuff, right? And foxes eat the rabbits. As you have less food, you expect to start to have less foxes. Well, when did you start having less food? At day like, we call that 22, right? When did you start to have less foxes? That was day like 24. So how long did it take for a change in one to start causing a change in the other? About 2 days would be your answer. Make sense? Hopefully. So another thing, just if you're brainstorming things that can cause your population size to go up and down, is that as you're living, you're creating waste. And if that waste accumulates, like you're growing in a little petri dish in a lab, right, and all your waste is you're just sitting in it, then waste accumulation, because that waste is toxic, that's why they call it waste, is going to cause your population size to go down, and therefore anything that could disperse that waste would be a good adaptation. Any way you can get rid of waste and have it not accumulate. And then of course disease, as we're living through, unfortunately, disease also regulates population growth, and if it's a communicable disease, it's definitely density dependent, right? Because the more organisms there are in a certain amount of space, the more that, usually again, bacteria or virus can spread. So here's a human population graph. This tiny little bump in the graph is really a large percentage of the human population that the bubonic plague took out in the 12, 13, 1400s or so. But you can see that human population lag phase for a long time. A few little increases or bumps in the road here and there, but right around Industrial Revolution time, a little bit before that, we started to take that exponential turn. We are now at 7 billion plus, right, and growing, and at some point in time, we're not different than any other kind of organism. This has to start to bend off, right? Maybe even with a little crash like you saw in that one group of water fleas. So another thing that you can be asked about that that makes a difference in terms of the potential for a population's numbers to increase a lot or decrease a lot is how old. What's the average age? What's the age structure of your group? So here we have, how can demographics data with respect to age distributions and fecundity, that's yet another word for reproductive ability, right, be used to study human populations? Well, you can get these kind of graphs. These are like bar graphs set on their side, so it looks like that pyramid thing, like we had pyramids of energy, or maybe we haven't had it yet, but whatever, we'll see those again. But here, just a little, you just take a little minute to look at this and see you have the percent of population is along the bottom of each one. And then you have year of birth and you have age, which of course are related. They really didn't need both of those, right? You have year of birth and year of age, and how many of your people are middle age? What percent of your population are middle age? What percent of your population is older? Not very much, right? What percent of your population is not fecund, so to speak, lower than reproductive age? If you have a lot of individuals that are lower than reproductive age, right, you have the potential in the next number of years when they grow up into reproductive age to go high population growth, right? Average population growth has kind of average numbers of old people, middle-aged people, and young people, not any one group greater than the other. If you have not many young people, you're not reproducing very much, right? You may reach the point where your population's not growing. Just as many are dying as are being born, or maybe even more dying than are being born because you have, lots of your population is in those ages where you're going to die eventually. So, 7.3 to 10.7 billion. Whenever I made this PowerPoint slide, predictions of human population by the year 2050. Are you kidding me? We're pretty close to that right now. So I think we're going to be probably, I don't know if closer to this, but definitely further from 7.3. So these are just some practice questions. I'm not going to go over these here with this. We can maybe do that in class.